Creating a background for your Dungeons and Dragons character can sometimes be a little tedious. If you play in more than one game or you've been playing for a very long time, you might have had to go through this process dozens and dozens of times. Or maybe you're just getting started in D&D and you're not quite sure how to make something that feels real and interesting and builds really great character depth. Don't worry, today I've got a few tips to help you come up with a really solid jumping off point to flesh out that new 5e character that are really easy to use, but just complex enough to better understand how to really role play that next great D&D adventurer. Let's start off with a very simple tip that is also surprisingly effective. Tip number 1 is to have not just one job, but also have 2 or 3 in your past that really helps explain your character's skill set, really expand those backgrounds. We don't need to implement these in a 20-page backstory of what life on the farm was like, but rather even simple bullet points are often more than enough. What's great about this is not only will it help you quickly fill in a bit of your character's timeline, but will also give your dungeon master little tidbits and seeds that they might be able to take and make use of later over the course of your entire campaign. Additionally, it has built-in in-game benefits potentially, right? So imagine your dungeon master asks you to make a roll to securely tie up your new captured henchman. These are rolls that probably everybody's had to make before. By looking down and seeing that you spent several years sailing aboard a ship as a deckhand, now you get to look to your DM and say, "Hey DM, I spent several years on a large ship. Could my character have some sort of knowledge on tying knots that might be useful here?" Now, of course, your DM might be more than willing to grant advantage on the check or perhaps even skip the roll entirely by saying that, hey, you know what? You're totally right. Your character is more than proficient and that a roll is no longer needed. A stable hand who tended to horses could do the same for dexterity checks to prevent falling off a horse or a mount, or to tame an untrained horse with animal handling, and so on. So fill out those resumes with 2 or 3 jobs that you've had in the past. Even by providing that info in very bare bones form to your dungeon master, it can go a really long way to helping you flesh out that character. And I mean, come on, it's really easy to do. Okay, so tip number 2 is going to start to get a little more complex, but the payoff is even larger, and that's to ask, who shaped your worldview? Now, there's a reason I wanted to phrase it like that rather than to ask the question, hey, who are your parents? Because what we're really looking for here is who were the biggest, most influential people in our lives that helped guide it, right? What impact might they have had on our character? Understanding this helps us tremendously when we are role-playing because it can help guide us at the table for how our character might think about the world, how we might perceive injustice, how we perceive royalty. Does our character resent nobles and noble blood? Do they see firsthand a father, an uncle, a mentor get drafted off to a needless war? Were they taught patience by this person? Here's a great one. Were they taught to follow the rules by a strict nun? Were they taken in by a loving family who worked to the bone just to put enough food on the table? Were they raised away from the city and taught to really fend for themselves and be independent? Or did our character fall in with a really rough crowd, Oliver Twist style? Or were they straight up in a street gang where they learned loyalty to your friends is the only thing that matters? What this exercise is really meant to do is to lay a little of the groundwork for how our character will act and think moving forward. And what I really love about it is that it both provides history and realism to your character that is, of course, more fodder for your dungeon master to play with and incorporate, but also it will tell us how our characters might act or even hesitate to act when presented with a quest or a plot line from some NPC. The story of Geralt is fantastic not because he's a strong witcher. Okay, that's the boring part of the books. Badass kills things with a sword in a really badass way. We get it. His story is great because of the other people in his life that helped shape and then challenge his own worldview. This allows him to become a dynamic character, and every single Dungeons and Dragons player should really strive to create those dynamic characters that don't just stay static the entire campaign, but rather grow and evolve. Evolve over 20 levels of, killing trolls and dragons, but evolve nonetheless. Tip number 3 is another very simple and easy question for your background, and that's to know, hey, where have you been? This is a very simple tip, so I won't spend too much time on it, but know where your character has been, or at least have a few ideas, and don't be afraid to have bounced around to several locations. Saying that your character is from the starting city or town or village of the campaign is perfectly fine, but it's also a little boring, and it doesn't really help your DM as much as you might think it does. Instead, being able to tell your Dungeon Master, hey, I lived many years in Waterdeep and then moved to 10 towns, but now I roam the countryside as an adventurer, is already a much more interesting characteristic and background than a character from just one place in the starting town that was there and gets pulled into the adventure. Right off the bat, you have much more room for really that creativity for your character, because the question is, hey, why do you move around? That, of course, can help you create a much richer background and texture for your character, even if you answer those questions after 10 sessions, 15 sessions, or 20 sessions later. And 2 quick sub-tips for this one. 1, you don't have to be overly specific in the timeline, right? I lived a few years in Waterdeep is perfectly fine. More than enough room for the DM and yourself to work with moving forward. And 2, if you're in a homebrew world that the DM hasn't really created every single city and town, just be vague. Hey, Dungeon Master, I understand you don't have the entirety of the world fleshed out completely yet, but my character would have lived in a seaport town and then they fled to the north for a bit. I don't have the exact reason fleshed out yet, but we can circle back to all of this later. How does that sound? That's plenty of content right off the bat for both of you, even though you don't know exactly which cities you might have lived in. All right, so tip number 4 is the most important tip on this list. If you just ignore everything that I've said up to now, that's fine. But remember this one for your next character. What is the catalyst for your character becoming an adventurer? Now, notice I didn't say, how did you get involved in the first session? Okay, that's what session 0 is for. What we really want to know is why our character has chosen this life as an adventurer. No matter the background or point of origin, every single adventurer has a point in their life that they decided to leave and earn coin with their blade. AKA, why aren't you simply a merchant or farmer or blacksmith? Those are obviously less risky. Why are you risking your life? Why did you choose this path? Perhaps it wasn't as free of a choice as it might seem. Maybe there's nothing to go back to because it's all gone. Maybe your family was slaughtered by a rival noble or an orc raid on a farm. Or is there nothing to go back to because you're not welcome home? There are plenty of scholars that study magic, but fewer that decide to hunt monsters and take up quests. If your level 1 character is a 16 strength fighter with a plethora of skills, why don't they sail on a merchant vessel, delivering goods and seeing the entire world? Hell, why aren't they just a pit fighter who boxes in dirty pubs and taverns? Why would they go willingly into a beholder's lair? What was that catalyst, that pivotal moment that they decided to stop tending to horses and look for dragons in the mountains? This question is so important. And over my multiple decades now, God, I'm getting older, of playing and running games of Dungeons and Dragons, it's probably the most skipped over part of every D&D character out there, more than really anything on this list. It's the one thing that will both create depth to your character and help your Dungeon Master immensely. Because having that catalyst, that pivotal moment, that turning point in your hero's story is genuinely, that's what makes them interesting. What would Han Solo be if he didn't come back? If he just took the money and ran? How differently would we view that character if he was only in the first part of A New Hope? That turning point, that pivotal moment where he buys into the adventure and the danger is what makes him such a likable character. Moving on to tip number 5, and that's to know where your lines are. It's no secret, I'm not a fan of alignment. It's far too oversimplified, it misdirects new players, and there is no longer, in D&D 5e that is, any real penalties for acting outside of your chosen alignment for your character. Overall, I feel it doesn't really add much to the character sheet. Instead, know where your lines are. Where is your line for something that you would or wouldn't do? Would you rob a corpse in the road? No one's around. Would you steal from a church you don't believe in? Would you watch a friend steal from a church that you don't believe in? Or would you say something or try to stop them? Would you stop a dog from being kicked abusively in the street? And of course, the next part of knowing where your lines are is also knowing what might make your character cross one of those lines that might break over that line. The Injustice series is a marvelous look at exactly this. Of course, Superman wouldn't kill, right? He would never use his mighty power to take over and control everything in a tyrannical manner. But when Joker tricks him into killing Lois and setting off a nuke in his hometown, well, all bets are off. And the same thing goes for your characters. Of course, your character would never burn a man alive. Even those who need to meet the blade shouldn't suffer. But what could someone do? What heinous act might they partake in that throws those scruples for your character right aside? So, know where your lines are, and just as importantly, know what might make your character not just cross those lines, but leap over them. And as a little bonus tip number 6 here, something I've mentioned on the channel before, have goals for your money. And to DMs out there who might also be watching this video, a little reminder for you guys, give your players opportunities to do something with that coin. Players, even something as simple as having your eye on a new plate of armor or a flying broom purchased from the Magic Misle for 450 gold each, have an idea on what your character would do with some coin jingling around in their pocket. Whether you want to take it down a very serious roleplay path and be very serious and say that you want to donate 500 gold to the orphanage that raised you and your brother, and that's your goals with your money. Or the greedy path, that you want to pick up a bag of holding so you can steal a bunch of stuff easier. Both of these are very, very simple ways to really help flesh out your character and make them more interesting. Plus, there's nothing worse for a DM, right, than players staring at you when they have some downtime, I don't know, and you've just given them a huge mountain of wealth. It gets a little boring and old. Oh, and don't forget to make a few interesting choices with that coin, right? Having a new tattoo placed on your character's arm for a dead NPC is a great one, or a shiny new fur coat from Penny Whistle's Boutique are both cool ways to really bring that character to life from the character sheet and numbers and spell names. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to you guys in the community. What are some things that got left off, particularly for the backgrounds, to help, flesh out your characters and give them some more depth? What are some things that you guys like to think about for each of your new characters to help them, not just be boring lone wolf Batman characters? Batman is sad background and I have no one and I'm angry and gonna take it out. Oh, gold. Okay, you know what? Now I'm just trolling all the players out there. I, of course, want to give a massive thank you and shout out to all of my incredible, sexy patrons out there over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, if you like this content, you want to support more content like this and snag some rewards for yourself, like maybe popping in a game with me or doing some one-on-one coaching sessions, welcomeadventures.com is a great place to do that. Link there. Yeah, that's it. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, or maybe you're learning to love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on DM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more stuff like this. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit the subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.